Chapter 6, The Storm. Dust to dust. It was one of those blistering summer days when the asphalt melts, the grass withers, and the air smothers those brave enough to step outside. Despite the heat, it felt like the whole village was at the funeral.
It was moving.
I stood there surrounded by people weeping over their loss, uh, looking at the rosaries they clutched in their fists. Something tightened in my chest. For a brief, chilling moment, I thought I saw Anya's face among the crowd, but no, I buried her in the barrows myself, and nobody there even knew she was dead.
It was someone else's funeral.
Anya was not the reason we gathered in the churchyard. The body of a hunter had been found in the forest. The circumstances of their death were unclear.
There had been more deaths.
There had been more deaths over the last days, but they slipped under the radar. We'd been careful in covering our tracks. Or nobody had connected the dots yet. Third option. Since the deaths, I'd started seeing shadowy figures, their faces flickering in the corner of my eye. Were they just figments of my imagination, or my own pack of hungry spirits following me, waiting for my mistake? I could feel the tension seething around me. This death, this funeral, had pushed the community, already wary and frightened by the recent disappearance of an activist in the forest, to the edge.
The world was watching.
Press, which is friendly. The press had swarmed the funeral like flies. They were reporting on how the illegal logging was a danger to both the ecosystem and human lives. The police were watching the crowd with disinterest as they leaned lazily against the trees.
It had become political.
Suddenly, Pushka White Tower had become politically charged and the hottest place to be in Poland, and it wasn't only local politicians and activists from both sides who'd caught wind of the commotion. The Minister of Environment himself had driven to White Tower to attend the funeral. He was standing next to the priest conducting the ceremony, surrounded by police and what looked like a handful of bodyguards. The coffin went down and the crowd stirred. Everyone started lining up to throw a handful of dust on the coffin or put flowers on the grave.
I found myself face to face with Bortek.
Bartek is unfriendly.
Bartek, yeah.
I got swept up in the crowd and found myself face to face with Bartek. There should be another coffin here because we both know that she's dead. He looked at me in the eyes. I really liked Anya, you know.
I froze.
See, and this is where I would be like, crack my knuckles, well, you can join her. It all has something to do with you, he said, and I will find out. I tried to play it down, I said nothing, or I wished him luck and use willpower.
I tried to play it down. I don't want to spend willpower, seeing how I have very little, and saying nothing just feels wrong. Well, I'm just being hostile, which is fine.
He's a tool. It's okay, I said. Please take care of yourself. Don't go chasing ghosts. Bartek looked at me in the eyes. Funny thing. It's like all the strange things started happening as soon as you all came here. I looked over his shoulder at the crowd. It was clear that many people felt the same way he did. And the minister knew how to use that sentiment.
I listened in disbelief.
I watched in disbelief as the priest handed him the mic. Zero rage. He wasn't someone you'd call a good speaker. He repeated some platitudes, but it was clear he'd only come to show his face and tighten the leash on the local logging companies. The crowd listened silent. He was trying to escalate, plus a rage. it was our move or it was also our doing.
You know what's the great, awful thing right now? That tooth is starting to hurt again. Fuck sakes. I think I'm gonna go with it was our move.
I realized the conflict was only going to escalate. Even if the forest had abandoned us, we still had a chance to end the logging. We were ready to defend ourselves, or we were ready to negotiate.
We were ready to negotiate. Let's try that.
Where there's a will, there's a way. It was high noon. The sun was at its most merciless, and the world was almost white with heat. The air smelled of herbs, bark, and tree sap. Insects buzzed lazily in the high grass, stunned by the summer sun.
We were setting up the protest.
The day was stifling. As we set up the protest, the whole clearing was decorated with banners, and we all had our placards. The banner we'd hung in the National Park headquarters the week before was just the warm-up. Wood is the enemy of the forest. That was our main slogan, but there were many more. My sign conveyed my anger. I wanted to protest against greed, or I wrote something constructive.
Greed or constructive? I think constructive.
Make the whole Pushka National Park, demanded my sign.
It was a...
It was a viable solution.
Okay, thank you.
It was a viable solution, I thought. The whole Pushka would be protected and people could still earn money on tourists. There weren't many of us, but everyone in the clearing knew why they were there.
The Pushka was watching.
Pushka is cautious. The Pushka was watching us with thousands of eyes. I felt the stare of every bird, mouse, and squirrel, every tree and insect. The stares were demanding, not friendly at all. You fucked it all up, they were saying. Now you fix it.
I thought about my destiny.
Since I came to White Tower, I'd been so sure that I was following my destiny, but was the future set in stone? Was there even a destiny to follow? When I stood there between my friends and my enemies, I saw more than one path ahead of me and was not sure which one to take. The pressure was almost palpable, and the tempers were flaring. The cops were gathering, or I looked at my pack.
This one's gonna be tough. I'll look at my pack.
Should we run over the plan again? Cornell asked, looking at my pack. I'll keep jamming their communication, nodded Pat, and we'll coordinate the protests, added Cornell.
I glazed at the other pack. Glanced? The other pack? Sorry.
The wolf mother and her cubs were in their position, guarding the forest and the perimeter of the camp, as agreed. That left the cops to me. I'd kept my eyes on them, or it wasn't too late to negotiate.
It wasn't too late to negotiate.
Zero rage option. I think that we should keep talking, I said. It's not too late for a peaceful solution. It's always worth trying, Cornell agreed.
The cops were gathering.
And the police are sympathetic. The police were nervous, huddling in groups and shouting at each other and everyone who was in their way. They clearly didn't want to be there.
Something was up.
It was apparent that they were waiting for something.
Then it reached boiling point.
It reached a boiling point when the minister arrived for a photo op. I had a bad feeling about it all. We'd attracted some attention, or we could use that.
We could use that.
I took it as a good sign. We could use his presence to our advantage, in more ways than one.
I calmed down slightly.
The press is friendly. I knew he was in for a nasty surprise. The reporters closed in on him, shooting uncomfortable questions about the legality of the logging and his forestry policy. In hindsight, you could agree, or you could argue that what happened next set a chain of events and motions and had life-changing consequences for so many. But it all started earlier, but it didn't change, but change didn't happen just like that, but at the moment, I didn't know that.
It all started earlier, let's go with that.
But the truth was, it all started much earlier, when Olga decided to go back to White Tower, when Cornell first heard about the logging, when my dreams made me question my destiny. The members of my sept had already moved to their positions, and I had also my part to play. The minister was bad news. It was our chance to start negotiations, or Zero Rage and Will. We could still ask him to stop.
Let's go with this one. It's going to lower my will and it's not going to be good.
Cornell grabbed my elbow. "Let's go," he hissed in my ear. "We might be able to talk to him." We pressed through the swarm of journalists. There were a lot of them. I smiled and apologized. We smiled and shook hands and apologized as we pushed through the crowd.
It gave me a moment to think.
I found the sweaty smell strangely comforting, but when we got closer to the minister, it became different, almost pronounced. There was an acrid tang hanging around him like a mist.
I think it's supposed to be acid, but I caught his gaze.
AKA, he smelled like worm.
Yeah.
The minister looked at us, and Cornell opened his mouth. "Get them out of here," snarled the minister, and turned his back to us. Zero Rage. I shook my head and laughed bitterly. What was I expecting? That the worm feeder would want to listen to us? Cornell touched my shoulder. "We'll find another way."
We went back to regroup.
Which sucks, because you spent your willpower
Yeah.
for that. The activists, humans and werewolves alike, listened as we told them what had happened. The atmosphere was tense.
We started our preparations.
We prepared ourselves for the worst case scenario. "Okay, let's move," I heard someone shout. "Move it, people, move it. You know what to do." And they did. There was a lot of laughter and friendly pushing, chains clinking, and some people darted up to the trees and seated themselves in branches. I was assigned to a human chain. You don't have willpower, so.
Yeah.
I helped form a human chain. "Hey," I heard. "Get those arms behind you. That's it. Attaboy." "It hurts," moaned a man's voice. "Next time do some yoga beforehand, huh? That's it, people. Open your hearts so you can hold your wrists behind your back."
So I locked my wrists.
I threaded my arms through the holes, or through the arms of people to my left and right, and then grabbed my wrists behind my back, so it was tight on my shoulders, hot and very sweaty.
Then we waited.
Zero Rage. We sat down, one long human chain, and watched the loggers and police as they approached and then stopped. The sun shone, and it was calm, almost serene.
It worked.
Then talks started there, and then I could see that the minister was an apt politician, and that he could smell a deal for himself in it all. But I didn't really care. We'd gotten what we wanted.
We started to talk.
I would have really liked to see that third willpower option, but... peace talks. When the talks started, we weren't alone. Luckily, our failed attempt to manipulate events from behind the scenes hadn't ruined our chances. There'd been some consequences, but we managed to work around them. So we started talking, and it became big. I don't know what tipped the scales in the end: the press, the international attention, the local interests coming together, our passion.
The talks weren't easy.
Finally, an agreement was within our reach, but the talks weren't easy. The state forests and the woodworkers, the local population, ecologists,
Scientists.
Scientists, activists, everyone wanted something. I was by no means an expert, but I wanted to play my part in the proceedings. I joined the negotiations, I made sure the talks were fair, or I acted behind the scenes.
I think I'm gonna go with the fair.
You're gonna let Cornell do the chit-chatting? Third option. So I decided to observe the talks and make sure everything was okay. The spiritual side of the situation interested me, and I wanted to make sure that both sides had good intentions. The talks went on and on.
Of course, I had my opinions.
Yeah. Everyone at the scene had their own opinion and their own own point of view, and I had mine.
Let's take the bark beetle.
What we're originally there for. The bark beetle was...
I know, but it's how that's worded.
I know.
Yeah.
In the middle of it all, of course, the spruce bark beetle. How come something so small caused such a gigantic uproar? The beetle had always been a part of the forest ecosystem, pointed out one of the ecologists, but the recent droughts
made the spruce more susceptible than ever.
The forester countered. We have to cut down the trees to stop a total disaster. I saw one problem with this approach. I didn't trust the officials. They cut the wrong trees, or the pushka, which you have no willpower. So.
Yeah.
I didn't trust a word that came out of the officials' mouths. The beetle was not the reason for the logging. It was an excuse. You fetishize the forest, scoffed one of the officials. People cultivated it for hundreds of years, and it cannot survive without our help. He's right. You want to take our forest from us, a group of locals attacked. The activists, you're not from here, and you tell us how to live our lives. It was not just a forest, yet they unbalanced the ecosystem.
I'm going to go with yet the unbalanced ecosystem.
The problem was that the human intervention unbalanced the ecosystem, and if they pushed any further, they'd lose all that made the pushka unique. Opinions clashed, tempers flared, and eventually new constructive ideas started to emerge. At least one of them caught my attention. The whole area should become a national park, which was what was on your sign.
Yeah.
International observers could help, or winning a local populace was essential.
I'm going to go with the national park.
There was a reoccurring idea to make all forests in the area a part of the White Tower National Park. The logging would be impossible, but there would be much more money from tourism. It was a long and hot day. I rubbed my eyes. I was so tired I could barely keep them open. My head was spinning.
I'm going to lose a health, but I kept going.
But I kept going. What was a little heat stroke when so much was at stake?
Drink some water.
Yeah, pretty much.
Talks continued.
Go get Olga to get you some water. Of course, they had to make it dramatic. There were cameras, there were lights, and the negotiation lasted all day long. We reached the first draft of an agreement literally at sunset. I had no doubts they'd only decide to stop the logging because they realized there was something in it for them.
I felt relief.
But at the moment, I just looked at the sky and laughed. I felt overwhelming relief. Maya? I heard a nervous voice calling my name.
I turned around.
Bartek is hostile. The voice was familiar, so I turned around. It was Bartek, his face pale, a rivulet of sweat running down his temple. There was a silver cross dangling on his chain around his neck. I know what you are, he said, his voice shaking. I've suspected it since you showed me that medallion. There was a gun in his hand, its wide muzzle pointed my way. I had to defend myself. Zero rage. We needed to talk. Or zero rage and
Yeah.
will, which you can't.
I either can do we need to talk or I try to swat the gun away. I'm just gonna go with we need to talk. If I swat the gun away, I think he's gonna fire it back him.
Yeah.
And then I may be blamed.
Bartek, I reached out in a consolatory gesture. Let's talk.
He shook his head and I lose health. Oh, he shot me.
What a dink. It's too late for that, he said and pulled the trigger. First off, you knew Anya for a couple of days, bud.
Yeah.
Like, The gun roared and I fell back. My chest burned. I couldn't stop the bleeding. That's for Anya, was the last thing I heard. There was only pain. Literally knew her for only days.